Maundy, Thursday. What in the world does that mean? If you've spent a lot of time in church, you might know what it is, and you may not. But for those of you who are not familiar with Christian lingo, that word Maundy leaves us kind of scratching our heads, wondering, well, what in the world does that mean? The word Maundy actually is derived from a Latin word meaning mandatum, which we get the idea of a command. And this comes out of the Gospel of John, John chapter 13, where Jesus washes his disciples' feet. And he says that he gives them a new commandment. That also can refer back to the previous chapter where Jesus talks about telling his disciples that he gives them a new mandatum, a new commandment, and that is to love one another. So tonight, that is what we will explore. How in the world does washing feet and loving each other even come close to being one and the same? Especially when we live in a world that instead of foot washing, we've done a lot of hand washing. Consider those things as you listen to this first song. It is in John chapter 13, verses 1 to 5, that we find this description of the event of foot washing. Hear these words. Just before the Passover feast, Jesus knew that his time had come to depart from this world to the Father. Having loved his own who were in the world, he now loved them to the very end. The evening meal was in progress, and the devil had already put it in the heart of Judas Iscariot, Simon's son, that he should betray Jesus. Because Jesus knew that the Father had handed all things over to him, and that he had come from God and was going back to God, he got up from the meal, removed his outer clothes, took a towel, and tied it around himself. He poured water into the wash basin and began to wash the disciples' feet and to dry them with the towel he had wrapped around himself. One of the things that is unique in John's description of this last meal is that he doesn't have the formal language that you find in the other synoptic gospels. Instead, the highlight is on this event. The next song you're going to hear will highlight what the other gospels talk about, the meal. So I invite you to hear these words, that as they are sung, and allow yourself to experience in your mind what might have occurred on that evening. I was 12 years old when I heard these words for the first time. Can I wash your feet? Immediately, I was awkward feeling inside of me. It was amazing to hear someone actually say, can I wash your feet? I knew it was going to happen. I was then of age in the denomination that I grew up in. I was at that age where I could participate in foot washing. We did foot washing once a quarter because that's when we had communion, once every 3 months. But before communion, we would divide into the men going in one direction, women in the other, and we would do foot washing. I had heard many different sermons. I had heard explanations of what the foot washing meant and why we were supposed to do it. The biggest one was found in John 13, verse 15, where it says, "For I have given you an example. You should do just as I have done for you." And the denomination I belonged to, they took that very literal. If you didn't take part in foot washing, it was questionable if you should take part in communion. So when I, for the first time, heard those words, "Can I wash your feet?" it made me feel awkward inside. And to be honest, for the 35 years that I participated in foot washing, I really never got over that awkwardness. There's something about taking someone's shoes and socks off. It just wasn't appealing to me. It wasn't something that I could get past, so to enrich myself somehow in the meaning of it all. But yet, that's what the text said, and I thought I was supposed to take it literally. As I got older, all of a sudden I began to realize that there were many Christian denominations that did not do foot washing. Catholics, on Maundy, Thursday, the Pope will wash the feet of 12 poor people, but other than that, they don't wash feet. Very few denominations within the Protestant realm wash feet. And that makes sense to me, because the idea of foot washing in a world that does a lot of hand washing, we don't get our feet dirty like they did in the past. So what in the world does this ancient ritual have to do with us today in the 21st century? Why do we even talk about it? Yeah, it's Maundy, Thursday, but why even discuss it? Is there any lesson in this story that could somehow apply to our lives today and how we live our lives from day to day? I think the answer to that question might be if we take the time to understand the context in which foot washing arose. In the ancient Near East, they didn't have a large selection of shoes. They had sandals. That was it. And even there, I'm sure they were limited in what type of sandal you had. So when you walked into someone's tent or home, your own home, or a visitor, if you were visiting someone, there would be a basin of water next to the entrance. And as you walked in, you would stop, and you would take your shoes off, or your sandals off, and you would wash your own feet. It was for two purposes. Number one, it felt good, that cool water on your feet. And number two, it cleaned them. Now, if you were one of the fortunate few that had a great deal of money, then one of the things that you would have is a servant. And you would assign this duty to one of the servants that perhaps just wasn't quite getting along and doing everything you wanted them to do. Because this was one of the most humbling actions that a human being could be called upon to do to another human being, to wash someone's dirty feet. This idea is captured in the former testament, in 1 Samuel. And David, when he meets Abigail, it says the following: "She bowed down with her face to the ground and said, 'I am your servant, and am ready to serve you and wash the feet of my Lord's servants.'" Now, on that night where Jesus met with his disciples for this last meal, we know that they weren't a wealthy bunch. So there wasn't going to be any servants. So you would expect that what would have happened would have been, as each of them entered the room, they would have taken off their sandals and washed their own feet. We're not told why that didn't happen. No explanation is given. And apparently they are in the midst of this meal, or starting the meal, when Jesus makes the first move. Now, when Jesus stood up and he walked over and he took the basin and he wrapped that towel around himself, he immediately created chaos in that room. That is not what was supposed to happen. If anyone was going to wash anyone's feet, it would have been one of the disciples washing the feet of the others and Jesus, because it was Jesus who was their teacher. It was Jesus who was the one that they followed. For Jesus to do that, it automatically disrupted the whole evening. Everything was out of kilter. It wasn't right anymore. But by doing that, Jesus was giving them a non-verbal message. Something that literally would take their world and flip it upside down. And that is, as far as from Jesus' perspective, there is no hierarchy. There's no this different social stratas that people can be pigeonholed into. According to Jesus, we are all one and the same. This is especially seen later on in John chapter 13, verses 12 through 14, where it says, "So when Jesus had washed their feet and put his outer clothing back on, he took his place at the table again and said to them, 'Do you understand what I have done for you? You call me teacher and Lord, and do so correctly, for that is what I am to you.' Now hear these words. 'If I then, your Lord and teacher, have washed your feet, you too ought to wash one another's feet.'" That is where Jesus brings this idea that to love one another, that command, and foot washing are brought together. Because it is at that moment we realize that to truly love each other, we have to see each other as being equal to one another. There is no hierarchy. There is supposed to be no discrimination among us. For those who choose to follow the ways of Jesus, this is one of the greatest teachings. I was amazed to find out how individuals were able to use their wealth to get the COVID vaccine earlier than others. How individuals with wealth were able to remove themselves from areas that were highly infected and where the COVID virus was spreading very quickly. I'm amazed at how we continue to have in our larger cities areas where different groups of people live based upon their income. I don't know about you, but I remember the first time my wife and I moved to a city, and our realtor was showing us around, and we didn't have a lot of money. And the homes that we could afford were not in the ideal neighborhood. And I remember overhearing another individual tell our realtor, no, you cannot let them live there. We treat each other different based on all sorts of criteria. And yet Jesus, through that simple act of foot washing, if it happened literally or if it's a story that was connected with him and the writer of the Gospel, John, is telling it, this story is still teaching a truth that I'm sure was a part of the historical Jesus' life, and that was he saw people the same. Didn't matter how much power they had or how little power they had. Didn't matter how sick they were or how healthy they were. Didn't matter if they could do something from him or they were asking something from him. Those things didn't matter to Jesus. He treated everyone alike. And maybe that's what Maundy Thursday is to remind us. In John, again, chapter 13, in verses 15 and 16, Jesus describes how it is in the majority of civilizations when he says, I tell you the solemn truth. The slave is not greater than his master. Everyone agrees. Nor is the one who is sent as a messenger greater than the one who sent him. So Jesus is setting forth for his disciples, this is the way society works. These are the different levels that people naturally will fall into based upon criteria that is randomly set up by human beings. But then Jesus, in the next verse, tells us what he envisions, his ideal. If you understand these things, if you understand what just took place, what I was willing to do to teach you that we're all in the same boat. There's no one better than the other one. No one deserves preferential treatment just because they have something that others don't have. He said, if you understand these things, congratulations, if you can do them. And then it hit me. As awkward and uncomfortable as it was to wash someone's feet, that was a lot easier than doing what Jesus just said. If I'm right in my understanding of this text, washing someone's feet, I can do that. But treating everyone equally and fairly and justly, that's a little bit harder. And yet, that's what Jesus was trying to communicate throughout his ministry. And maybe that's what we need to be doing. As we come closer and closer to Easter Sunday, the opportunity for new beginnings, a new life, Perhaps now, between now and then, we can reflect upon where we find ourselves and how we treat other people and how we interact with other people. Amen.
In an upstairs room, a parable is just about to come alive. And while they bicker about who's best, with a painful glance he'll silently rise. Their humble servant must show them how, through the will of the water and the tenderness of the town. And the call is to community, the impoverished power that sets the soul free, in humility to take the vow that day after day we must take up the basin and the towel. In any ordinary place, on any ordinary day, the parable can live again when one will kneel and one will yield. Our faithful servant must show us how, through the will of the water and the tenderness of the town. And the space between ourselves sometimes is more than the distance between the stars. By the fragile branch of the servant's bough, who take up the basin and the towel. And the call is to community, the impoverished power that sets the soul free, in humility to take a vow that day after day we must take up the basin. And the call is to community, the impoverished power that sets the soul free, in humility to take a vow that day after day we must take up the basin. And day after day we must take up the basin. And day after day we must take up the basin and the towel. Take up the basin and the towel.
As you enter into another week, and as you begin to prepare yourself for Easter Sunday, I invite you to receive this blessing. But before you receive it, stop and realize that a blessing is not fully complete until we allow it to do its work within us, and then we pass that blessing on to someone else. Here are now the words of this blessing. As if you could stop this blessing from washing over you, as if you could turn it back, could return it from your body to the bowl, from the bowl to the pitcher, from the pitcher to the hand that set this blessing on its way. As if you could change the course by which this blessing flows. As if you could control how it pours over you, unbidden, unsought, unasked, yet startling in the way it matches the need you did not know you had. And if you could become undrenched, as if you could resist gathering it up in your two hands and letting your body follow the ark this blessing makes.